couple of weeks ago, gave an interview on 2UE Radio, had a debate with Dr. Jamal Justin. He seems like a really nice guy, sort of thing. I think he means well, and he is genuinely concerned about Islam. But I felt tonight's meeting, he came across as being the world's biggest apologist for Islam. Islam is just a failed ideology, so I find it very difficult that he can sort of, he was honest in a way that there's a problem with ISIS, there's a problem with radical Islam, but then in the same sentence he'd say that there's no problem with some of the youth in Australia. I mentioned the de-radicalisation program, that the government's spending $670 million. What a waste of taxpayers' money. Multiculturalism is just a money pit, you just keep throwing money at it, and it's never going to get better, it's only going to get worse. And I'm an optimist for the future, optimistic about the future if there's political movement can sort of continue to build against the government. But with the current government policies, how can you be optimistic? You need to be honest, and it may come out as being pessimistic and negative, but you can't be optimistic about multiculturalism. Islam that's ridiculous. It's almost a mental illness, hinging on a mental illness to sort of try and portray something that it's not, and tried to see the whole thing with man models as having nothing to do with Islam. Well, it had a lot to do with Islam, and in that window, in the windows of the Lynch chocolate shop, there was Shahada was flying, so that says everything about Islam. Man Monis had a history of being a spiritual healer and touching up women, 43 charges against him, accessory to murder, and his whole life he had a very religious, spiritual zeal, and he was a Muslim. 1-800 jihad. You think that'd get the sort of people sort of a bit worried about what was going on, but apparently not for our ASIO or DPP. But that's the thing with multiculturalism and cultural understanding and sensitivity, that it goes under that crony banner that these people get away with so much. But yeah, I was just, Islam and Muslims are the same thing. I hear this bullshit from a lot of people, and I heard it from Jamal today, and I hear it from a lot of Australians. It's the same thing. Muslims believe in Islam, so how can it be different? And maybe not all of them believe in the terrorist ideology or Sharia law, the extreme versions of Sharia law that are implemented in many parts of the world, but it exists and it's real. So yeah, it's frustrating when you talk to an apologist, but I do believe that he does mean well, and he's trying to be a beacon in his community, but he's ultimately going to fail because Islam's a failed ideology. And we talked about reform, how Christianity, in the Reformation, and the sort of that blooming of science and freedom of speech and literature and democracy and the separation of church and state, which I think is very important. And people can still be Christians in a private life, but Islam's incapable of doing that because it's a public religion, it's an ideology, and there's no separation of mosque and state. That'll never happen. It never has happened in 1400 years. And Jamal said we just need more time. Well, we've had 1400 years. I don't know how much more time we have to give Islam. I don't see anything nice in Islam at all. It's nothing. There's nothing beautiful about Islam, about an ideology that is dominated by chauvinistic sort of imams that believe that women don't have any rights and minorities don't have any rights, and anybody that sort of judges Islam in a critical way or makes judgment of their prophet or their God, he's probably going to die or going to face some pretty tough consequences of sort of like speaking about Islam in a truthful manner. We're the messenger, so don't shoot the messenger. It's all about getting the message out there. And a lot of people will take it personally, and so did Dr. Reefy, in the way that I said, look, multiculturalism has been a complete failure. All this immigration's a complete failure, and he takes the viewpoint that Australia has benefited immensely from multiculturalism, and he didn't understand multiculturalism, and I asked him to sort of explain it to me, and he struggled with it, and definitions, meanings are definite, and they don't change, and multiculturalism is not about mutual understanding. I'm tired of hearing that it's about mutual understanding. assimilation's about mutual understanding and respect, and spoke to him about the changes of Australia over the years, and how the mid-70s saw that Labor and Grasby and so forth and the Liberals continue on with multiculturalism. It's got nothing to do with respect, and it's got everything to do in the belief that all cultures are equal based on cultural relativism. And I'm sorry, the Islamic culture and many of these other third world cultures in Australia are not equal. Their attitudes and social behaviour are not acceptable, and especially when it comes to Islam, when in belief in Sharia law, that's inseparable from the religion. Just because some Muslims may not practice it, and Jamal he wanted me to believe that what he was saying that I should take as gospel and treat all other Muslims according to what he's saying, like he's some sort of spokesman. And I think he definitely means well, but he's deluded, because he doesn't represent all Muslims, and Muslims come in all different varying degrees of extremism, and they're incompatible with our low way of life completely. I just see nothing compatible with Islam in Australia. And for example, when we were at court today at Burwood Court, and I told him about the criminality and the welfare dependency in the Muslim community, and he just tried to write it off and said, no, it's not like that. But when we were at court today in Burwood for another matter that that will come out later on, half the the perpetrators in there that facing court on various charges were Muslim. Now this is the thing, like most of the people in that courtroom were either Muslims, Africans, or Asians, And I just think, wow, they're all in the courtroom here, but we're supposed to be benefiting from all this diversity, all this cultural enrichment. But here they are in the courtrooms clogging up the courts. And had a look at the court roll, and there weren't many Anglo names there, but especially the Muslims, they seem to be very sort of prone to sort of, behaving in such a way that they take advantage of whatever they can, and it results in criminal charges or jail time and welfare dependency too. And yeah, Dr. Jamal tried to push all this aside and say that Muslims are no different to anybody else in regard to criminal behaviour and also welfare dependency, but that's absolute bollocks. We know that. And he said that Australia is growing and progressing by accepting more Muslim immigration, and I don't believe that at all. I think we're going backwards at a very fast rate. And he said that Muslims only take up 0.5% of the Australian population, which is bollocks, because it's about 3% of the Australian population, and they're rapidly growing. And in the last 10 years alone, I told him that the Muslim population has more than doubled. And that is a concern. I said, if we did that in your country, you'd be up in arms making war with us. And it's genocide. It is absolute genocide. And it's not just with the Muslim community. In the last 10 years, we've seen the Chinese-born community more than double. Mass immigration coming from mainland China. We've seen the Indian population triple in 10 years. So there's a policy of replacement. It's systematic and deliberate. The government knows exactly what they're doing. It's worrying. It's worrying because at the core of every nation and culture and heritage is an identity, and you can't deny that. We never talk really about the Australian identity and the great things that the British brought to Australia, the institutions establishing a great nation. We never talk about the people who established the nation. It's a fact, They don't like to talk about that at all. It's just all talk. It's from the 1970s onwards, since multiculturalism, that seems to be the only sort of, view we get of Australia today. That modern sort of context of multiculturalism that's been forced upon us. But Australia sort of survived very, very, fine way before multiculturalism was implemented, and it had a much higher standard of living, was more cohesive. And he spoke about the 50s and the 60s sort of thing. Oh, what a terrible place Australia would have been. I said, well, there was full employment, there was affordable housing, there was almost zero crime. You could leave your car keys in out the front, and door you could leave that open, and Australia was a very lucky country. And I don't see how we're coming fast forward to where we are in 2015 today, that this is progress. This is bullshit. We're regressing at a fast rate of knots sort of thing. This is not something that we should be glorifying. But I think for him, coming from a place like Lebanon, seeing all the problems sort of thing, and he was quite honest in the way that the Muslim world hasn't been able to sort of have any enduring peace or security, and these problems need to be dealt with. But, we can't deal with them. We have no control over Muslims and their behaviour. And when you have people that are sort of like using our welfare system in Australia to grow their population, you can see in the future that where we're headed, that we're heading towards a situation, what's happening in Western Europe, especially places in France, in Germany, in Britain. Spoke about the rape cases in Sweden, in Malmo being the rape capital of Europe, and he disregarded some of this sort of thing, But so he is probably Australia's greatest apologist, but I think he is well-meaning. He's not an aggressive person. He's not in your face sort of thing. He's got a religion to protect and apologise for, and a people. It is a shame that I just can't see anything coming out of it positive that Islam is going to grow or there's going to be any reformation, because it needs to come from Muslims. You can't have this forced sort of external sort of pressure, and I did agree with him that US foreign policy hasn't helped in the Middle East. It's actually it's decimated the Middle East, and then him being a Sunni took the viewpoint that the Shia are responsible for some of these problems, and they probably are. But I tell you what, between Shia and Sunni and the sectarian violence that is very lively over there at the moment, definitely the Shia that I've met, and I see them as not as radical as the Sunnis. And in Saudi Arabia, I told him that he's the biggest terrorist state in the world. It's not Iran, it's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has been funding terrorism way more than Iran, and building mass sort of amounts of mosques and schools, and establishing sort of Islamic faculties on university campuses and that sort of thing, and influencing political parties. Saudi Arabia is much more of a sort of concern, I believe, than even a Fruit Loop sort of dictatorship like Iran. It's not democracy. I love it how they call it a democracy, but it's not. There's no democracy in Islam. Yeah, but it is a concern because we talked about freedom and democracy, and he talked about that Islam should have the same rights in the way that they should access freedom too. But if they do in Australia, that's going to be anarchy, because if we give everybody freedom in Australia, if we give everybody freedom in Australia, that's complete anarchy. And our context of democracy is in the context of Western civilization, where men and women, of course, we're never going to have a perfect world, but there is some sort of sense of equality. You'll never have a complete equality. That's just ridiculous. It's circular arguments, like saying that I've got equality with James Packer. Well, I don't, it'll never fully exist, but the inequalities in Islam are so pronounced that, goodness me, us in the West, I don't know why there's any sort of feminist movement, because they got it so bloody good. I'd like to send all these feminists over to Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia for a few months and see how long they last. We'll put them in the fire and see how they go. But it was a really interesting evening. We'll see what happens in the future. We've got different projects coming up, and I spoke to Justin about that sort of thing. And they are controversial. Some people mightn't like them, but we've got to bring these sort of issues to the fore in a very sort of, they are controversial, but bring them to the fore in such a way that we get national discussion on a broad range of issues, especially Islam, because it's I don't want to see this failed ideology in Australia. I just don't see anything nice about it, and I've got to be brutally honest, otherwise I'd be lying, sort of thing. So it was a good night. You'll probably meet Jamal another time again, and probably speak to Justin too. I'd be more than happy to. But they spoke about Reclaim too, and Jamal spoke about Reclaim being a bit of an extremist movement. And I said, no, it's not at all. And I said, look, I invite you and Justin to come down to Reclaim and talk to the people down there, because there's a lot of good people down there. Come down and talk to them. And there's a lot of Australians from different backgrounds. And they've got a pretty sort of truthful, negative view of Islam. But come down and meet these people and talk to them. And I don't really think that Jamal really appreciated that. And I said, well, like we like getting out and about, and I said, look, Muslims do want a Muslim Australia, and they want Sharia law implemented in Australia. There's no doubt about it. And I said, look, let's go down to Lakemba, and we'll talk to Muslim people down there and say, look, what are your feelings on Sharia law in Australia becoming a Muslim country? Do you want this? And there's no doubt that majority of them would say yes, because they are very zealous people, sort of thing. It's an ideology. It's not just a religion. They can't live and let live. So, he said, look, they would just say yes, just to be under, be in your bonnet, sort of thing, just to sort of thing. They just say yes, just to piss you off, Well, I don't believe that they would just say that just to piss them off. And so I said, what are you calling them a liar? The Muslims liars, are they? Just to piss me off, And that's just bollocks, because they do want Sharia law. It's inseparable from their political sort of religious ideology of Islam. So, I will extend a welcome to them at the next Reclaim Rally to come down and talk to people and get they need to find out for themselves, to how people feel in Australia. And we've got a right to be angry. We've got a right to be angry at our government and these pathetic policies that have been forced upon us for the last 4 decades. Australians have a right to exercise their democracy and get out in the streets. And we've seen at the Reclaim rallies, the people, the violent ones, are the anarchists, the communists, and the Islamists that rock up. And you can just see by having a look at the police lines, the barricades that are formed between both protesting groups, sort of thing. And our opponents, the counter-protesters, the lunatics, the police have their backs faced to us. So it's pretty obvious that they trust us, but they don't trust the fruitcakes. The lunacy of the left is on display at these rallies. And, so we'll see what happens anyway. It's just sort of, we spoke about Cronulla briefly too. And they spoke about it being a disgusting moment in Australian history. And look, I think that good and bad, we need to sort of, it's part of our history. And I see Cronulla as not being a disgusting moment. I see it as sort of being a moment that people fought back. And it was just sort of, there was a lot of anger. There were a lot of gang rapes going on in 2005. There was a lot of stuff, you know what I mean? Australians just don't get in a car park and pull open a few eskies and get on the piss and have a fight. Australians were pushed into a corner, and we know that the sort of lifeguards a week before were bashed, and there was a lot of antisocial behaviour going on down there at the time, and a lot of people sort of were affected by this behaviour. And the retaliation attacks were way worse. And again, I think it was the Yemma government that was in power. They were apologists, just arse-licking the Islamic community. And that's where the problem lies. Our government has been so pathetically piss weak. They have not stood up for the virtues of, the principles of bringing people together. Because multiculturalism is not about that. It's all about division. And in the end, multiculturalism breeds monoculture, because when you go to places like Lakemba or you go to places like Cabramatta, I don't see multiculturalism. I see monocultures on display. But, it's going to be interesting to sort of see what happens in Cronulla, 10 years this year. But today was a fantastic day. A lot happened today. It was really interesting. And, I was really grateful to meet Dr. Jamal Rifi. He seems like a very sort of, I enjoyed his company. He seems like a decent human being. And that's the thing, Justin said, I can't believe it that you can sit down here and talk to Jamal and you can treat him just like a normal person, but you don't like his religion. And I said, well, absolutely. I said, that's, we don't need to make it personal. We need to separate our emotions from this argument and not make it personal, because, Jamal's here. I don't want to see him go, sort of thing. He lives in Australia now. He's got a family here. But we don't need any more Muslim immigration, and we don't need any more multiculturalism. It needs to be disbanded totally. And we do speak about, too, just digressing about what's happening in Saudi Arabia. And I said, look, there's not one single church in Saudi Arabia. Christians don't have a right, or nor do Jews, to exercise their religious freedom. And I said, you want us to grant you that right? Well, if you want rights, it should be reciprocal. And he said, oh no, but we need to be better than them. And I said, so you're saying that your people have a problem. Your religion has a massive problem. It is intolerant. It is intolerant of others. And it manifests itself in that behaviour all the time with all these terrorist attacks and, going after different minorities and that sort of thing. And, what's happening in the Middle East with the Yazidis and the Kurds and the Christians and the Jews and even sectarian violence with the Muslims. Enough is enough. Let's be honest about this. Islam just doesn't belong on this planet.